But let's hear about this from an expert in the field. Glenn Fahey is Education Scholar for the Centre for Independent Studies. And we'll see if he can find some value in all of this. Glenn Fahey, welcome to the program. What's your assessment of the value of the interim report that's been produced by Ms O'Kane into the higher education sector?
Look, as always with a report like this, it is a mixed report card. I'm going to try and stress some of the redeemable features for you and then come to some of the challenges.
Thank you.
The report was right to identify that there's a teaching problem at universities and students are not getting a quality experience during their time there. It's right to see that the business model isn't working and that better incentives and competition are needed. And it was right to say that there were some policies in the last government that were good ideas but were not working as intended. However, these are not the items that the government seems most energised and enthusiastic about. It seems to be doubling down on the tried and failed approaches of the past, and that's you can increase equity simply through increasing access to university, and that you can improve outcomes simply by increasing funding. But the lesson is well known in education that you can't redistribute your way to a better education system. To improve equality in the system, you've got to also improve the quality of the system overall. And that's where the government really needs to focus as they move forward with this reform.
Let's be really frank here. We have a world-class HECS or HELP system that means that anybody with the ability intellectually to go to university does not genuinely face a barrier that prevents them from going. Sure, they might have something to repay once they get working, but ultimately everyone who wants to go to university in this country truly can. So surely this pushing for equity and diversity is almost doubling down on much of the problem that these institutions face, when they need instead to be focusing on how they can become bastions of thinking and merit.
There's no doubt about that, of course it's a noble goal to increase the rates of participation at university, and it's right to try to improve participation for groups that have been historically underrepresented. The question is how you get there. And at the moment, the idea that simply improving access to places is going to result in more graduations is flawed. And you don't have to take my word for it. The Productivity Commission released its own report in 2019 that said the demand-driven system, that was a system designed to increase participation rates of students, simply didn't result in more graduations at all, and certainly didn't help the most disadvantaged students anyway. What it did do was increase participation at university from middle class, middle ability and low ability students. It did very little to improve access to university for rural students, for outer suburban students or Indigenous students at all. And the main reason for that is that school results in some of those groups have not been able to keep pace. And that's, unless you can improve that part, you're simply going to be engaging in educational redistribution, which will not work in improving outcomes for any of the at-risk students that we want to improve.
Look, I've been a university lecturer in the past, and I can honestly say there were people in the law program who could barely string a sentence together. And there needs to be a raising of standards, not an opening of more places to more and more people so that we're becoming less demanding of what we expect from students. We have institutions at the moment that are, lukewarm or downright hostile to free speech, that allow academics who reject woke populism to be bullied and harassed by activist students, and who fire academics who express research-based opinions that differ from their colleagues. With all of that in mind, how come none of those things seem to get a mention in the report card, and yet this alternate universe of priorities has been justified?
Well, we've seen decades of data showing that when you lower standards to university, you might increase enrolments, but you don't increase graduations. And we know that universities really don't do enough to help students who they admit that might need extra help, because those students might need help in still learning how to be an effective writer, how to have effective study techniques. Universities often admit students who really do have marginal grades and could use more support. Now, we want to ensure we help those students, but it can't come with the current business model. And you're also right to point out some of those issues in institutions where groupthink and ideological groupthink in particular is an issue impacting in some faculties at universities. And you would have seen that in your own experience. And I can tell you that there's an area of study that I've been troubled by for many years, and that's the groupthink in education faculties of universities who have been flogging off ideas that are ideologically based and have been not keeping pace with evidence and have failed to prepare teachers in particular for how to be effective in the classroom. And I worry for the students in those degrees where they've not been given the kind of training that they deserve. And it's why Senator Henderson earlier this week called for students to have access to refunds, for instance, when they get poor training. And that's something I think the government needs to engage with. There should be consumer protection for students who are not getting quality training.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if the education faculties are wrong, it's no wonder our international performance in schools is on the slide.